Hello and welcome back to the final lesson of Chapter 29 with Mr. Smock in Honors American History. Today we're going to talk about the war in Europe and the sparks that ignite and how it affects America initially. Although the next chapter deals largely with World War I and the events of the U.S. intervention, it is worth noting that there's a period of time that World War I goes on without the United States largely as a part of it. So today, we're going to talk about the section that's titled Thunder Across the Sea, where we have Gavrilo Princip, who's a Serbian nationalist, wishing only the best for his country and fearing that the Austro-Hungarian Empire is becoming oppressive to Serbia. He joins a group called the Black Hand, which is like this extremist group of nationalists out of Serbia. Extremists to the sense that they believe the only course of action that can prevent Serbia from being taken over by Austria-Hungary is to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand or his father, the king. So they send 5 assassins to Sarajevo, Bosnia, where their job is to kill Archduke Franz Ferdinand or his father, whoever happens to be there, thinking that at this point they can cut the head off the snake and it will cause the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So he shows up, and 4 other assassins try ineffectively during a massive parade in Sarajevo. Almost laughably bad. The first assassin allegedly threw a grenade over the Archduke's car, striking the next car and exploding it, taking a cyanide pill, killing himself. The second, pulling out a gun, firing 3 shots and missing, and then being gunned down in the river. And it's just a story of failure after failure, so much so that Gavrilo Princip decides that he might not want to do this anymore. He's kind of has a moral and life favoring conversation with himself, saying, "Do I want to do this anymore?" So he goes and decides to have lunch, and the Archduke reaches his designation. He gets to the city hall that's being designated on behalf of Sarajevo towards the ruling portion of Austria-Hungary, and he eats his meal and he decides to leave under the protest of his military advisors. Military advisors say there's something going on. We need to make sure that you are safe. And he says, just adjust the path. And so they take a different route. Well, the route happens to take them by Gavrilo Princip, who's eating. He steps out of the crowd and shoots the Archduke in the chest and abdomen, and then also shoots Archduke Franz Ferdinand's wife, Sophie, and kills both of them. They both bleed out horribly death, suffering to the end. This event, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, causes Austria to become very angry, obviously, because their heir to the throne has been assassinated, and says that they have a list of demands to Serbia. And in the list of demands says that Austria basically gets to send in their military, Inquisition, Spanish Inquisition style, to go find these members of the Black Hand and bring them to justice according to Austria, subjecting all of Serbia to this. And Serbia says no, and rightfully so. Serbia says we're not going to agree to this. And because they don't agree to it, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. And it's going to be a very short war. Serbia is a small nation with a small army. Austria-Hungary is one of the largest empires in Europe and one of the strongest military powers in the world. This looks like it's going to be a very short war. But before anything can happen, Russia steps in diplomatically and says, listen, this isn't right. Serbia shouldn't have to allow your military to come in, and your demands are kind of off the chart. Well, Russia happens to be a member of a secret alliance against Germany and Austria-Hungary. And it's not so secret because Germany and Austria-Hungary know about it. And Germany and Austria-Hungary are in an alliance that's secret, but also not so secret because everybody else knows about it, against Russia, France, and Great Britain. And so when Russia steps in, Germany comes out of nowhere and declares war on Russia to protect its ally, Austria-Hungary, and says, we know that you're in a secret alliance with France. And so Germany then turns around and declares war on France. And Russia says, fine, I'm going to declare war on you and your ally, Austria-Hungary. And Austria-Hungary, in the midst of all this, says, fine, I'm declaring war on France and Russia, and I'm also going to declare war on the third member of your little alliance, Great Britain. And so we go about a week from having Archduke Franz Ferdinand alive and well, and then his assassination sparking this massive domino effect of declarations of war that draws the vast majority of Europe into the war. And as the United States, we're watching and we're listening to everything that's going on, and we're very, very thankful all of a sudden that there's a 3,000-mile boundary between us and Europe, because that could very easily spill over to any nation who tries to remain neutral within close proximity. Thankfully, we have an ocean between us. At the onset of World War I, Wilson does experience his own tragedy. His wife had just recently died, and this fundamentally changes Woodrow Wilson. He is not the same man. That's not the same moralistic diplomacy, even-keeled person. He becomes a little bit more off-centered. And he issues this proclamation that everybody in the United States and in the war in Europe hears about, that the United States is neutral, that all of our actions are going to remain neutral. And because we are neutral, then we should be treated as such, that our vessels should not be targeted, that we have rights as a neutral country. And so part of this is him saying that the United States is going to remain neutral, but it's also a part of telling the warring nations in Europe that just because there's a war going on doesn't mean you get to sink whoever you want to sink and shoot at whoever you want to shoot at. As the war wages on, it's really easy to dislike Kaiser Wilhelm II, the leader of Germany. He is in a different era, he would be called a totalitarian. I mean, if he was in World War II, he would be the same as Benito Mussolini, as Adolf Hitler, as Joseph Stalin. The way he operates himself was just easy to hate, especially with the value system the Americans and other democratic nations have. And so, as you can see with the propaganda poster on the right, destroy the Mad Brute. The Mad Brute is Germany. As you can tell from the German helmet, the imperial helmet that the ape has on, and he's just like bloodlusted and crazy. It's also really easy to hate the Germans or to dislike the Germans and Austro-Hungarians, because there are certain spies that come into the United States and try to get strikes to emerge, to try to destroy certain machinery, and sabotage the American war effort, because we're not just supporting them, we're supporting their enemy, England, France, and Russia as well throughout this. And so that brings about a lot of anti-German and anti-Austro-Hungarian sentiment. And the American public starts to turn more and more towards support of the Allies during World War I. Also, as World War I begins, America has this booming economy that is only going to benefit from this war in Europe. And so we can sell guns and ammunition and food, and basically whatever you need in the course of your war, we can sell you. And this is why this section's titled America Earns Blood Money, because no matter what we sell, it's going to result in the deaths of someone else. So it's blood money. We're getting money in exchange for giving them a tool that will eventually somehow be traced to the deaths of others. So the United States was allowed at the onset to trade very freely, that is, until the British Navy blockades Germany. So when they blockade Germany, there's no trade in or out of Germany, and Germany was very reliant upon our agricultural trade. This also brings in J.P. Morgan, who is a huge financier, banking financier, invested in the stock market, and will help partially give out loans to Allied members of World War I. And this helps kind of jumpstart the American economy out of a recession in the late 19 teens before we get involved in the war, obviously. Germany will make this announcement that they are going to start this unrestricted submarine warfare, that because we're not trading with them and other nations aren't able to trade with them, that nobody should get trade, and they're going to sink anybody that is trading with the allies. And Wilson releases a statement saying that he's going to hold any of these attacks to strict accountability. If you attack an American ship, if you attack a ship with Americans on it, we're going to hold you to accountability. And that's really hard to do. Like, it's very bold words by Wilson, but where we're not involved in the war and we're not really willing at this point to join the war, right there, it's nothing but bold words. There's really three ships that are talked about in the text that influence the American viewpoint of the war. And the first one is the HMS Lusitania. It is a passenger vessel, and as a passenger vessel, it has about 1,200 passengers on board, including 128 Americans. The HMS Lusitania is targeted and sunk by a German U-boat because it was believed they had war goods in the stores of the ship. As the ship is sunk, it turns the American public's viewpoint of Germany in World War I more towards acceptance, almost towards this sense of dread that we as a nation are going to get involved in this because now all of a sudden innocents are dying, and morally, with our moral diplomatic ties to our hemisphere of the world, now we're going to get involved in this and stop the German warlords. It's almost inevitable to many people. And so Wilson and many Americans are going to chastise Germany for this and claim that they're going to hold them responsible, but very little actually happens. The Germans are going to sink another ship very shortly after in the Arabic, and there were a few passengers on board, including 2 Americans. This again kind of brings back up those harsh feelings against Germany and creates just a little bit more hatred towards Germany. And it isn't until the Sussex, which is a French passenger vessel that sunk, is shot by German U-boats, that the American public actually issues a cry to do something. Now, we can't go to war technically because it's not directly against the United States, but the Sussex Pledge does come out of this. The U.S. demands that Germany stop sinking ships all willy-nilly. They cannot do this anymore because it's a war against mankind. It is something that is not just targeting the Allies in the war effort, it's hurting innocents. Now, the Sussex Pledge by Germany says that after the Sussex, they promise not to sink any more ships as long as the United States can convince Great Britain to lift their blockade. And so now you have a central power, Germany, asking a neutral power in the United States to ask an allied power to lift a blockade that's helping the allied power win the war. Wilson cannot do this. And Great Britain, why would they? They're winning the war based upon the pledge, or based upon the blockade. And so the Sussex Pledge only lasts long enough to kind of get American people out of the war effort, to get them out of Europe. So in 1916, like every 4 years, we have an election here in the United States. We have the incumbent, Woodrow Wilson, who is the Democrat. He runs largely upon his successes in his first term. The New Freedom was a huge success. Tariffs were brought down. Taxes were brought down. High finance and banking was brought under control. Trusts were brought under control. And so he runs on that success. And kind of as a secondary platform, the Democratic Party raves about the success of Wilson to stay out of war, although Wilson never says anything about staying out of war. He understands that we are getting pulled slowly but surely into the war, and never makes a direct statement about it, although his campaigns and his supporters believe that that's something that is a success to him. On the flip side, you have Charles Evans Hughes, the Republican candidate. Charles Evans Hughes has a pretty good background. He's the governor of New York. He's He's a Supreme Court justice later on, and a very bright man, and runs a very similar campaign, basing his campaign on the "we need to stay out of war" and chastising Wilson for not doing enough to keep us out of war. The real difference between their campaign, they're very, very similar in that the war is a bad idea. And the real difference in their campaign is that Charles Evans Hughes is pro women's suffrage, while Woodrow Wilson is still against women's suffrage. That really is the only major difference in their campaign. Now, if you're a moderate voter who's not voting party line, then you're going to make a decision based on who has fulfilled promises more than likely. Now, Hughes is making promises, but he has no background in the office of the presidency to back it up. And so historically, we believe that's why Woodrow Wilson wins the election in a very narrow race, wins 277 to 254 in the Electoral College. And with that, Wilson is back in power. It's 2016. He'll be inaugurated back into the presidency in 2017. And that is the end of this chapter. Obviously, everything here is pointing towards World War I, as it should, because that's going to be a big event, and it's going to be a real challenge for Woodrow Wilson. But that is a topic for another day.